You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Feel like who art ed?
Try to slice it.
Who art is Mr. Wood art ed me?
Good. Either way, it's ambiguous. It works on so many levels.
I know.
That's off to a great start.
Welcome to Who Arted, weekly art history for all ages. I'm your host, Kyle Wood, and today we're looking at Artemisia Gentileschi. Now, since this is an all-ages show, I do want to point out that Artemisia's biography includes some rough stuff. While I don't like to dwell on the worst things that happened to a person, it's kind of hard to separate that element of her biography from her work. And so it will be mentioned. And if you don't want to hear about that kind of stuff, you might want to select a different episode today. Now, Artemisia was born on July 8th, 1593 in Rome, Italy. She was the eldest child and only daughter of Orazio Gentileschi, a well-known painter and close friend of the infamous Caravaggio. She grew up surrounded by art and artists, so it seems natural in one sense that she might take up the trade herself, but it's also a bit surprising because in the 17th century in Rome, the art world was almost exclusively a man's world. Women were generally expected to manage households, not master complex techniques of perspective and anatomy. Thankfully, Orazio recognized his daughter's exceptional talent very early on. By the time she was just a teenager, her skill had begun to surpass that of her brothers, and her father boasted to friends and patrons that she was becoming one of the most talented painters in the city. Of course, because she was a woman, she did face some serious obstacles. Artemisia was barred from attending the professional art academies where the men were studying. Instead, her father taught her, although if you think about it, it wasn't really that strange historically. I mean, most artists back in the day learned through apprenticeships, starting with low-level skills in the studio and working their way up. So she learned to grind pigments, prepare canvases, and most importantly, he taught her about tenebrism. That's a style of intense contrasts between bright light and deep, murky shadows. It was sort of the hallmark of the Baroque period, really heightening the drama, designed to make paintings look very theatrical. The early 1610s was a turning point for Artemisia, both personally and professionally. In 1611, Orazio hired a painter named Agostino Tassi to tutor Artemisia in perspective. Tassi assaulted Artemisia and then refused to marry her, which at the time was the legal and social requirement to, quote, restore a woman's honor. Now, I would argue marriage would make things far worse for the survivor, but that's how they tried to handle things back then. Kudos to Artemisia, though, because she didn't quietly accept the assault. She actually pressed charges. There was a sensational 7-month trial in 1612. It's really amazingly documented. I mean, we even have transcripts today, but I'm not going to wallow in the grisly details of someone's trauma. Artemisia showed courage standing by her testimony even when the court subjected her to the Sibyl, a form of torture, in order to verify that she was telling the truth. Tassi was eventually convicted and banished from Rome, although from what I gather, that sentence was rarely actually enforced. Now, all of this was a huge public scandal, but Artemisia refused to let it define her. She wasn't going to be just a victim. Shortly after the trial, she got a fresh start. She married a Florentine artist named Pierantonio Stiatesi and moved to Florence. It not only allowed her to sort of get away from the trauma, but also to get out of her father's shadow. I mean, he was a well-established artist, but she wanted to establish herself as an independent artist, and she showed herself to be one of the highest caliber. In Florence, her career took off. She became a court painter for the Grand Duke Cosimo de' Medici and struck up a friendship with Michelangelo Buonarroti the Younger, the great-nephew of Michelangelo of Sistine Chapel fame. He was actually so impressed by her work that he commissioned her to paint a ceiling fresco for the Casa Buonarroti, the house dedicated to the memory of his famous relative. In 1616, Artemisia became the first woman ever admitted to the Academy of Arts and Drawing in Florence. This meant she was officially recognized as a professional artist, but it's much more than that. This recognition gave her some more rights in society. She was able to do stuff like sign her own contracts and buy her own supplies without her husband's permission. While she was successful in Florence, Artemisia eventually returned to Rome and then moved to Venice and Naples. She was constantly seeking new patrons and higher commissions. In the 1630s, she traveled to London to assist her father, who was working for King Charles I. While she was there, she painted her famous self-portrait as the allegory of painting. After her father passed away, she returned to Naples, which remained her home for the rest of her life. Naples was a bustling, gritty art center, and Artemisia fit right in, running a busy studio and also mentoring other young and up-and-coming artists. Artemisia continued painting until she passed away in 1653, and for centuries after her death, actually many of her paintings were mistakenly attributed to her father or other male artists. It wasn't until the 20th century that art historians began to untangle her legacy, recognizing her as not just a female painter, but really one of the greatest storytellers of the Baroque era. Today, she's remembered and celebrated as a feminist icon and a trailblazer for women in the arts, but really, most of all, she was just an amazing painter, really skilled with the light and shadow and capturing human emotion on the canvas. So now I want to take a closer look at one of her most famous works, Judith Slaying Holofernes, painted around 1620. It's a large-scale oil-on canvas, about 6 feet tall, which is obviously quite a challenge for any artist to tackle. The grand scale really brings you into this picture, brings you into this world. I mean, when you're standing in front of something that is so massive, it's overwhelming, and I think that's part of the point. The painting shows a scene from the Old Testament. It's the Jewish heroine Judith saving her people by decapitating the Assyrian general Holofernes while he was drunk and asleep. In the painting, we see 3 figures emerging from a basically pitch black background. Judith is in the center. Her sleeves are rolled up. She's gripping a massive sword with one arm and the general's hair with the other. Her maidservant, Abra, leans in to help. She's pinning the muscular Holofernes down to the bed. The composition has strong movement with intersecting diagonals. The arms of the 2 women form a V shape that directs the eye straight to the center of the action. And this painting is also just a great example of her use of tenebrism. The bright light hits the white bed sheets and the arms of the women, making the scene seem like just a flash went off in a dark room. But really, one of the most striking details has got to be the blood. Artemisia didn't shy away from the realism. She shows us the blood spatters on Judith's dress and the bed. She's showing us an understanding of the physics, the anatomy, and just how all of this would play out. Most other artists who painted this scene would kind of soften it. Artemisia shows the gritty reality and the physical effort required for the task. Judith isn't looking away in disgust. She is focused, determined, and putting her full weight into the movement. Now, obviously, this is a religious-inspired and history-inspired piece, but it's also deeply personal. Many art historians believe the painting was Artemisia's way of processing her own trauma. If you look at the face of Holofernes, it bears a striking resemblance to Tassi, the man who assaulted her. Judith, meanwhile, is often seen as a self-portrait or a representation of Artemisia's own strength. But it's not just about revenge. It's about agency. In most versions of this story painted by men, like the version by Caravaggio, Judith looks delicate, hesitant, even frightened. Artemisia's Judith, though, is a warrior. The presence of the maidservant as an active participant symbolizes some female solidarity. They aren't just two women, they're a team working together to overcome an oppressor. And the sword itself is a very powerful symbol. I mean, Judith is taking that. It's a transfer of the power from the general to the woman he underestimated. It is a perfect example of that Baroque drama of that era, but also it showed in that age when there was a rigid hierarchy in the arts that women could paint the history paintings, the most prestigious and difficult genre of art, with as much grit and technical skill as any man. Even hundreds of years later, today people still point to it as a wonderful example of feminist art history. Countless artists have talked about how Artemisia's work has been really transformative in showing women as not just objects of the male gaze and appreciated for their beauty, but as powerful, complex, and resilient human beings.
This concludes this week's episode of Who Arted, part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. If you found this tolerable, please leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app. You can find images of the work being discussed this week and every week on social media at Who Arted Podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and of course on the website whoartedpodcast.com. Podcast done.